Hey everyone, welcome back to Infinite Podcast. I'm your host, and today Simon and I are diving into something pretty cool, the roots of country music coming right from the Appalachian Mountains. Now think about this. You've got a mix of Scotch-Irish folk songs, African-American blues, and those deep religious hymns all stirring together in those secluded hills. Simon, it's wild how such an isolated spot became a melting pot for what we now know as country music, right?
Oh, absolutely, Joe. It's like someone took a giant cultural blender and just went to town in those mountains. I mean, can you imagine? You're just hanging out, strumming your banjo on the porch, and then you've got your neighbor 2 hills over mixing in some blues notes he picked up from somewhere. Next thing you know, you've got the early sounds of country music brewing. Wild stuff, truly.
Right? It's like this organic chemistry lab, but with music. That blending is raw and real, no high-tech stuff, just pure heart and soul going into the sound. Makes you appreciate how these grassroots movements really shape what we listen to today.
Yeah, but here's the thing, Joe. We say it's all heart and soul. Like, sure, absolutely. But then I think about how today's music is so polished, almost too perfect, you know? There's something to be said about that raw sound from back in the day. It had errors, it had real emotion, not just, what do you call it? Auto-tune and digital tweaks. How do we even get that real feel back in today's tracks, right?
Yeah, Simon, I totally get you. The authenticity of it all, like those imperfections were part of the charm, right? Nowadays, everything in the studio is so sanitized. But back then, it was like you heard every string squeak, every slightly off-tuned note, and it just, well, it felt real. Maybe producers today could take a leaf out of that old Appalachian book, huh? Strip some things back to basics. Embrace that rawness again.
Yeah, man, totally. Like, imagine this. What if modern producers actually did that? Just strip things all the way back to the bones of music? Do you think today's audience would even vibe with something so raw, or are we just too hooked on that slick production now?
Well, that's the million-dollar question, isn't it? Think there's definitely a niche that would absolutely dig it. You see, vinyl making a comeback, right? Right. There's this craving for something tangible, something that feels more real. So maybe, just maybe, if producers strip down to the essence, like those Appalachian roots, we might see folks really embrace that authenticity. It's sort of like a full circle moment in music evolution, huh?
I don't know, Joe. I'm kind of skeptical. Like, sure, vinyl's back and there's a crowd for old school stuff, but it feels like a niche, you know? The bulk of us are streaming tunes on apps where the flashiest, catchiest tracks win. Do you really think enough listeners today can sit down and appreciate how raw and stripped down those Appalachian origins are? Sometimes I guess I just feel like we're in a fast food music era. Quick, easy, mass produced.
You've got a point there, Simon. But let me toss this story your way, kind of related to what we're chewing on. So back when I was growing up, my grandpa used to play the harmonica, right? And he had this old beat-up thing, definitely seen better days. But the sound that came out of it, man, it was raw but beautiful. We'd sit on his porch and he'd play these old folk tunes he learned from his dad, tunes that hitched a ride all the way over from Scotland. And what struck me even more when I listened to him, it wasn't just about the music being technically perfect. It wasn't. It was about storytelling, sharing something personal. Now translate that to today's scene. Yeah, we've got all the sleek production, but those moments with my grandpa remind me why the Appalachian influence is so special. They encapsulated stories, captured emotions. Maybe, just maybe, that's what we need a bit more of in today's tracks.
Man, Joe, that harmonica tale makes me think maybe we all need a beat up thing in our lives to keep it real. Your grandpa was like a one-man Spotify from the olden days, except instead of playlists, he had stories and you couldn't skip tracks. Imagine if every time we tried to skip a song today, your device would tell a 10-minute story from grandpa first. That'd slow us right down.
Yeah, Simon, that's uh, kind of awesome to think about, really. Like your idea there, it's a wild twist, making tech work like an old school grandpa storyteller. But you know what? It might just be what we need to slow down and appreciate the depths of music again. This whole Appalachian influence discussion really digs into that, doesn't it? Their music wasn't just background noise, it was fully woven with life stories. You couldn't just skip through history. Sure makes you nostalgic for those simpler times when every tune had a tale, right? Heck, maybe it's time we started blending more of that old soul back into today's tracks. Kind of mix up the new with the dusty old notes from those Appalachian strings. What do you think? Could a little retro infusion shake things up?
Yeah, tossing a bit of that old soul into today's tunes could definitely add some spice. Like you're mixing a classic cocktail with a modern twist sounds refreshing. But Joe, how do you think artists today would even start to weave in those authentic Appalachian elements without it feeling kind of forced? I mean, it's one thing to appreciate the sound, it's another to make it gel with the pop beats we're used to, right? What's your take?
Yeah, Simon, it's a tough nut to crack. But artists could start by dabbling in those Appalachian instruments, banjos, fiddles, dulcimers, to layer their tracks with a rustic vibe, like working in a sample or riff here and there instead of overhauling their whole style. And then lyrically, they could sprinkle in some storytelling aspects typical of mountain music, those raw narratives about life, hardship, and resilience. It doesn't have to be the central theme, but more like an accent, a flavor that enriches the overall tune without overwhelming the modern touch. So it's subtly weaving it through the fabric of new sounds, creating this bridge between the old soul and new waves without making it feel out of place or forced. That way, the essence of Appalachian music can seep into today's tracks organically. What do you think? Would that approach fly?
Yeah, Joe, I'm digging that bridge idea. Just a pinch here and there could make a huge difference. It's like adding just the right spice to a dish. Doesn't overpower, but sure as heck makes you notice something special is going on. Mixing Appalachian roots with modern twists could be the next big sound wave. But listeners, what do you all think? Is there room for more old school soul in today's music scene?
Speaking of spicing things up with a taste of Appalachian music, banjos and fiddles are like the quintessential instruments in that scene. Actually, it's pretty fascinating how these pieces ended up defining a whole genre. Let's dive deeper into the world of banjos and fiddles, the iconic staples of country music, huh? What do you say, Simon?
Yeah, Joe. Diving into banjos and fiddles is like uncovering the secret sauce of country music. Didn't the banjo originally come from Africa? And then it finds its way all the way to the American South, kind of morphing along the journey. It's like this musical chameleon, right? How do you think that African root influenced the sound we associate with good old country music today?
Yeah, the banjo's journey is like a story of transformation. Originally from Africa, it was primarily used in traditional music there. When it made its way to America via enslaved Africans, the instrument adapted to new cultural landscapes. This adaptation, reflected in the design and playing styles, infused fresh vibes into folk and later country music. The banjo's twangy sound, that distinctive pluck, it gave Southern music a new kind of rhythm and brightness that it didn't have before. Combined with the fiddle, which has its roots in Europe, you've got a mix that really forms the backbone of what we think of as classic country music. These instruments, each bringing their unique history, create a dynamic and richly textured soundscape that resonates with stories of American life, both past and present.
That's a solid point, Joe. But there's another angle here. While the banjo and fiddle are iconic, some folks argue they kind of pigeonhole country music, you know? Like when people think country, they immediately go to banjos and fiddles. It can overshadow the genre's diversity. And it's not just about sound, it's also about perception. There's incredible richness in country with influences from blues, jazz, and even rock. But sometimes those other elements get, like, overlooked because the banjo and fiddle sort of dominate the narrative. It leaves some potential untapped for exploring how modern instruments could evolve the country genre further without losing its roots. What do you think about that perspective?
Uh, that's a valid point, Simon. It's like the banjo and fiddle do sort of brand the genre with a specific sound and image, right? And while that's part of its charm, it can limit how people see country music as a whole. I reckon there's this fine balance between honoring these traditional sounds and exploring new boundaries. Maybe incorporating more modern instruments or fusion styles could showcase the versatility of country without ditching its roots. Could be interesting to see artists experimenting with synthesizers or electric elements while keeping a piece of that distinctive banjo twang or fiddle cry in the mix. Like, ultimately, it's about letting the genre evolve while still tipping the hat to where it all began. What's your take on introducing more diverse sounds into country music while keeping that classic vibe alive?
Oh, for sure, Joe. Imagine a country track where there's like a slick guitar riff mashed up with a hardcore banjo showdown. It could totally flip what we think of as country. Could end up bringing in fans from genres we never expected, like Blend It Right, and maybe even metalheads would nod along to a banjo beat. What a wild crossover episode that would be, huh?
Yeah, Simon, mixing in those guitar riffs with a banjo could seriously whip up something fresh. It's like blending two worlds that nobody expected to mingle. Uh, I'm totally picturing this. What an epic mashup it'd be. And thinking about metalheads grooving to country tunes is pretty out there, but could be exactly what shakes things up. Do you think these unexpected blends could start a new trend, merging fans from all over the spectrum? What's your vision on where this could go?
Uh, Absolutely, Joe. Merging different musical styles with country could really spin things around and pull in a whole new crowd. Like you take that core banjo and fiddle essence, blend it with unexpected elements, even electronic beats, and suddenly you've got something that transcends traditional barriers. Think about it. Young audiences might get hooked because it's fresh but still has that soulful storytelling heart. And longtime country fans could appreciate the nod to tradition while getting a taste of where music's headed. Could be like bridging generational gaps through tunes. This potential trend mix-up, it's not just reviving interest, it's reshaping the future landscape of what country music can be.
I get where you're coming from, Simon, trying to blend and update the classics for a new audience. But here's a thought. Might there be a risk in stretching too far? Like if we start plugging in too many modern twists or electronic beats, could we end up losing that raw, authentic vibe that makes country music, well, country? I mean, banjos and fiddles have this deeply resonant cultural significance. They're not just instruments, they're storytellers. Our challenge is to introduce new sounds without diluting those stories. How do we ensure that these traditional instruments don't just become background noise against more dominant modern sounds? Balancing innovation with preservation. That's the real puzzle, huh? What's your take on maintaining the soul of country amid all these changes?
Joe, you're hitting on something crucial here. Preserving the authenticity of country music while stirring in new flavors is like walking a tightrope. But let's not forget, both the banjo and the fiddle weren't originally part of American music. They were brought here and adapted over generations, kind of like they were remixed versions of their former selves. The banjo, with its roots stretching back to instruments made by African slaves like the akonting or ngoni, evolved into what we now recognize in bluegrass and country settings right here in the Appalachians. And the fiddle, which trailed from Europe, especially from the British Isles and Scandinavia, transformed distinctively as it mixed with other American forms. Now, the key could lie in continuing this tradition of transformation, but consciously respecting their narrative powers. For instance, storytelling isn't just about lyrics. It's also about how these instruments speak through their playstyles. Banjos plucking away life's complexities, or fiddles crying out the highs and lows. So while introducing new sounds, maintaining focus on how these instruments lead the dance of a track might just help keep that soul intact. We're not replacing, we're adding layers. Just gotta make sure those original voices sing through the crowd, huh? What do you think? Are we capable of keeping that core alive as we experiment?
Absolutely, Simon. It's like we're the music chefs here, mixing in ingredients but keeping that signature dish intact. And you know what? I think it's all about bold experimentations while respecting the roots. We just have to be careful not to drown out the flavors that define the genre. Are listeners ready for a taste of this new country blend? What do you guys think?
Oh, Joe, speaking of signatures and blending, humor's always been a secret spice in country music, huh? Like all those comical little ditties that poke fun at life's messes. Think about it. Doesn't laughing through the hardships just scream country?
Uh, yeah, Simon, you're spot on. Laughter through the tough stuff. It's just so deeply woven into the fabric of country music. These humorous ditties, they do more than just make us chuckle. They kind of sketch out life's ironic twists and turns in a way that everyone can feel deep down. Think about songs with lyrics that poke fun at broken trucks or ex-lovers who took everything but the dog. It's like humor becomes this coping mechanism, allowing folks to connect over common struggles while getting a little lift from the laughter. Don't you think that's why these tracks resonate so much during hard times? Like, they give listeners a lighthearted escape while staying true to everyday realities. What's your take on why humor hits home in country music, Simon?
Absolutely, Joe. It's like humor in country music serves up this double whammy of feeling kind of understood and getting a good laugh too, right? When a song lays out life's whoa roller coaster with a grin, it sort of says, hey, we've all been there without getting too down about it. And think about the craftiness it takes to write those lyrics that hit just right. Artists kind of have to be part-time comedians. The brilliance is not just in making us laugh, but making us feel part of a bigger collective experience. Joe, do you think there's something special about country artists' ability to spin yarns that tickle the funny bone while pulling at the heartstrings?
Well, Simon, I see where you're coming from, but there's another side to this. While humor definitely has its charm in country music, not everyone might connect with that style of storytelling or find it appealing, right? Some folks might prefer more straightforward, serious narratives that speak to the raw and real aspects of life without the comedic overlay. And here's why that viewpoint holds up. Music at its core is about connection. Uh, Depending on personal experiences or cultural backgrounds, what resonates with one listener might totally miss the mark with another. The clever wordplay and humorous spins in lyrics can sometimes overshadow the deeper messages for those looking for more direct emotional engagement. So while many appreciate the humor as a form of relief and connection, there's a significant number of listeners who might seek pure emotional depth or a more classical storytelling approach in their music. That's the beauty of country music. It can offer different things to different people. What do you think, Simon? Can the humor in country songs be a hit and miss, depending on the listener's perspective?
Oh, Joe, you've got a point there. It's like seasonings in cooking. Some folks love their tunes spicy with humor, while others just want the raw, marinated emotions, no frills. It's all about that personal palate, huh? Makes you wonder how artists strike that balance or choose their flavor. What do you reckon makes an artist go for laughs over tears in their tracks?
Simon, diving deeper into why artists might lean toward humor instead of straight-up emotion, it's kind of like they're choosing their unique signature style or voice in the genre. Artists who opt for laughs possibly see themselves as these conduits of lightheartedness in a genre often pegged down by heartache and hardship. Like, some might find that weaving humor into their lyrics allows them to tackle serious topics, think relationships, societal issues, in a way that's palatable and more approachable without diminishing the importance. It's a crafty way of drawing listeners in with a smile while slipping in some hefty thoughts under the radar. And then there's this element of tradition in country music, homage to the greats before them who managed to tell profound stories with a wink and a nudge. Artists might feel propelled to keep that legacy alive, merging timeless themes with contemporary irony or satire, crafting tracks that resonate across generations. So, Simon, it's like they're balancing on this line between tribute and transformation, using humor as their tool to connect. What do you think about the role of tradition in shaping how artists decide between tears and laughter?
Joe, I reckon you just hit another layer there. Tradition versus innovation. It's almost like these artists are musical tightrope walkers, huh? Balancing on the wire between giving a nod to the oldies and grabbing the mic for something totally new. Makes you wonder if they're winking at the past or eyeing the future more. What's the tighter tightrope to walk, do you think?
Simon, speaking of balancing tradition with innovation, there's actually a whole movement where modern artists are diving back into the roots of classic country while keeping their gaze firmly on today's audience. Look at folks like Chris Stapleton or Casey Musgraves. They're kind of pioneering this revival by mixing classic sounds with new age themes. What's your take on this kind of roots revival in modern country music?
Well, Joe, that's a sharp observation for sure. But while I totally see the charm in folks like Chris Stapleton and Casey Musgraves bringing back those classic vibes, there's this part of me that kind of wonders, are we just wearing rose-colored glasses here? Are we romanticizing the past a bit too much? Because let's face it, diving back into roots is great and all for authenticity. But what if it stifles new creativity? Like instead of pushing boundaries, artists might lean on tried and true formulas because they're safe, familiar, and guaranteed crowd pleasers. Now, don't get me wrong, I'm all for tipping your hat to the greats, but maybe there's a line where reverence can sort of blur into mimicry, right? The challenge, I think, is keeping that mix fresh without just rehashing the old tunes for commercial gains. So it's super intriguing, Joe. How do these artists keep their work genuine without just riding the nostalgia wave? What's your feeling about balancing innovation with tradition without falling into the trap of overdone revival?
Simon, you're definitely tapping into something real there, man. It's like, on one hand, it's absolutely heartwarming to see artists bring back those rich classic sounds. There's a warmth in that traditional twang and storytelling that just feels like home, right? But then you've got a solid point about possibly leaning too hard into the past. It makes you wonder if we're clinging to a golden age idea rather than genuinely exploring what country music could evolve into. And let me tell you, it kind of tugs at me a bit because I love seeing our musical heritage honored, but it shouldn't be at the cost of stifling the new voices and fresh perspectives that are pushing the genre forward. What these artists are doing, like Chris and Casey, is beautiful, but there's this thin line, yeah? They need to balance honoring the roots while injecting personal innovation that does more than just mimic the past for nostalgia's sake. It gets me thinking, how do we nurture this revival so it becomes a true renaissance, not just a replay? How can artists draw from the well of tradition without just repeating history? Seriously, it raises big questions about authenticity versus commercialization. Seems like we're all searching for that magic formula. What do you reckon, Simon? Any ideas on striking that perfect chord?
Oh, Joe, it's like we're trying to mix the perfect musical cocktail, right? A dash of the old, a splash of the new, and bam, does it taste like the classics or something totally fresh? Maybe every artist should come with a mixologist degree. What a wild idea.
Ah, Simon, that's a brilliant twist. Every country artist doubling as a musical mixologist. Imagine the kind of innovative blends we'd get from that. It's like every album could be a new surprise on the menu. What do you think our listeners would want to hear in that perfect playlist cocktail?
Joe, while the idea of every artist as a mixologist is like super cool, some of our listeners might actually crave just the classics, pure and simple. They might be thinking, why mess with perfection, right? Because let's face it, those timeless tracks have a kind of magic that doesn't need any remixing or modern twists to stand out. For these fans, it's all about the authenticity that comes from sticking to the roots without blending it into something new. It's like they want the whole nostalgia trip, untouched and unshuffled. So, playing devil's advocate here, there's this valid point in preserving the original sounds and tales just as they were. In many ways, staying true to those roots could be seen as keeping the genre's identity intact, rather than compromising it for broader appeal or innovation's sake. Plus, focusing on what has historically defined country music might keep it unique in an industry where so much else feels like it's constantly changing. Casey Musgraves or Chris Stapleton staying more traditional might not just be safe, It might be what keeps them connected to listeners who value that heritage most. What do you think? Does going full classic still have its charm, or are we just stuck in the past?
Simon, you've got a point there. Going full classic does have its undeniable charm. There's something about those pure, untouched tracks that just resonate differently, right? They carry this weight, this history that new mixes or interpretations can sometimes gloss over. But then, sticking strictly to the classics, it makes me wonder if we risk turning country music into a sort of museum piece, you know? Preserved and admired, sure, but maybe not as living and breathing as it could be, with some fresh influences woven in. It's like, is there a way to honor the roots without missing out on the chance to grow and evolve? What do you think, Simon? How do we keep the spirit of the classic alive while also embracing the new paths that artists are forging today?
Oh, Joe, that's the million-dollar question, isn't it? It's like trying to keep a vintage car running on modern highways without losing its classic charm, or heaven forbid, turning it into just another retro diner decor piece. How do we ride that line, huh?
Yeah, Simon, that's exactly it. You know, that reminds me of this old Mustang my uncle used to drive. It was a classic, sleek, shiny, everything you'd imagine. But as time passed, keeping it in its original state became like a bigger challenge. Parts weren't available, and honestly, it wasn't fitting too well with the modern needs anymore. So he made a decision. He started integrating modern parts into the old frame, disc brakes, a better suspension system, things that helped it run smoother without ditching its classic essence. And let me tell you, it worked beautifully. The car maintained its vintage charm, but became way more adaptable and enjoyable in today's world. It's kind of like what we're talking about with country music. Integrating new elements doesn't necessarily dilute the essence. Instead, it can enhance the relevancy while respecting the roots. Just like my uncle's Mustang, right? Finding that balance keeps the tradition alive and thriving even on new roads. Don't you think that's kind of what we need in music too? Keeping the soul, but upgrading the parts to keep up with the times?
Oh, Joe, what a perfect analogy with that Mustang. It's like balancing the best of both worlds, hanging on to the soul while not being afraid to tweak under the hood. Absolutely makes you think about how much more we could explore in country music with just that mindset, right? Let's chew on that idea some more next time. What transformations are lurking around the corner for our beloved tunes, eh? Who knows what other classic gems are waiting for a modern twist?
Speaking of modern twists on classic elements, Simon, it kind of nudges us toward looking at specific instruments that have carried through time, right? Like the dulcimer. Now, there's an instrument with deep Appalachian roots, but surprisingly, its story stretches way back to Europe before it became a staple in bluegrass. So let's dive into what makes this instrument so unique in design and style. Shall we explore how the dulcimer's dynamics are more than just historic, but genuinely transformative in the music scene? What do you think, Simon? Ready to trace those tunes?
Oh, absolutely, Joe. The dulcimer really is one heck of a standout in the string family. It's got that distinct plaintive sound, right? You just hear a few strums and you're transported back to those rolling hills, even if you've never stepped foot there. And the way this instrument came over from Europe, it kind of morphed along with the landscape and people of Appalachia. And about its design, it's fascinating how simple yet versatile it is, allowing players to endlessly tweak and express themselves. It's not just playing music. With a dulcimer, you're like painting with sounds. That evolution in style, how players nowadays might mix traditional with new techniques, that keeps the dulcimer so fresh and exciting. Makes you wonder, huh, how many more transformations this old soul can undergo while still keeping its roots vibe intact. What's your feeling on that potent mix of tradition and innovation through an instrument like the dulcimer, Joe?
Well, Simon, that's a solid take for sure. But you know, there's another angle to consider here. While the dulcimer has this potential for innovation, some purists argue it's essential to preserve its traditional style super strictly. They worry that too many modern tweaks could dilute its distinctive Appalachian essence. So, from their perspective, keeping the dulcimer tied closely to its original form and playing techniques isn't just about nostalgia. It's about maintaining a cultural identity that's been passed down through generations. Like, it represents a particular time, place, and people, and changing it too much might strip away those connections. And honestly, there's merit in safeguarding that authenticity. It sets the dulcimer apart from other instruments and keeps its history alive in the music it creates. Maybe the real challenge is finding the balance, encouraging new expressions while respecting the roots deeply enough so they're always recognizable. What do you think, Simon? Can we find a middle ground, or is one side bound to win out in protecting the purity of the dulcimer's heritage?
Well, Joe, you've hit a real twangy nerve there. It's like asking if you'd prefer your grandma's classic apple pie recipe untouched or with a cheeky sprinkle of cinnamon. Both are great, but purists might clutch their pearls at the change. Can we cherish the traditional dulcimer while still spicing things up without causing a musical uproar? What a toe-tapping conundrum.
Absolutely, Simon. It's a bit like walking a tightrope while juggling, exciting yet risky. What we're really looking at is how to keep the dulcimer jams authentic for the purists while spinning it enough to resonate with the crowd craving that sprinkle of innovation. Here's to mixing it up without dropping the ball, eh?
Yeah, Joe. Hitting that sweet spot is kind of like being a DJ at a wedding, right? You gotta play those classic hits the aunties and uncles will groove to, but also drop some fresh beats for the younger crowd. It's all about reading the room, or in this case, tuning into what makes each dulcimer fan tick. So, thinking about our listeners from both sides of the spectrum, how do you reckon we can deliver content that strikes that balance? Any ideas on bridging that generational taste gap in our upcoming shows, maybe with some crossover tracks or featured artists that could appeal across the board?
Simon, while bridging the generational gap sounds like a neat plan, there's also a strong case to be made for spotlighting purely traditional or purely modern streams separately. By dedicating space to each style individually, we might actually deepen our listeners' appreciation for both ends of the spectrum rather than merging them. Like, think about it. By showcasing traditional dulcimer music in its authentic, unchanged form, we honor and preserve its heritage. That's crucial for educational purposes, right? It gives new listeners a clear sense of where this music came from and why it's important. On the flip side, dedicating episodes or segments to just modern interpretations could push the boundaries of what the dulcimer can do, attracting listeners who might not otherwise engage with traditional folk instruments. So, perhaps instead of mixing it all together and risking that neither side feels fully satisfied, we present both perspectives clearly but separately. This way, purists get their deep dive while innovators showcase how they're taking the dulcimer into new territories. What do you think? Does setting up distinct showcases appeal, or is blending still the way to go?
Oh, Joe, that's a solid point. Wrapping each style in its own showcase could really let each one shine on its own merits. It's kind of like giving each flavor its own stage at a food festival. Let the visitors pick their plate. Let's chew on this idea and see how our listeners feel about diving deep into both worlds separately, preserving the essence while exploring the edges. Who knows what hidden tunes or trends we might uncover down this dual path, right?
Absolutely, Simon. Diving into the craftsman's world opens up a whole new layer of appreciation. But hey, speaking of crafting, let's pivot to something that sits right at the intersection of tradition and innovation: mandolin making. How are today's luthiers blending old world techniques with modern tech? Could give us quite the insight on why some top players prefer one over the other, don't you think?
Yeah, Joe, that's a sizzling topic. The art of mandolin making. Wow. Now there's a craft that's as rich in history as it is in sound. You know, these luthiers, they're like wizards, right? But here's the thing. While those classic techniques are about keeping that authentic twang alive, the modern methods, they're all about precision and sometimes, dare I say, perfection. Now, don't get me wrong, I appreciate a sleek, state-of-the-art mandolin just fine. But sticking solely to either old or new techniques, that might not do justice to what the instrument can really offer. Think about it. Combining the warmth of traditional hand carving with the accuracy of modern tools could lead to some, like mind-blowing sound quality that appeals to purists and innovators alike. Could this be the sweet spot for both camps, Joe, or am I just dreaming too big here?
No, Simon, you're not dreaming too big at all. Blending those methods could seriously be the future of mandolin craftsmanship. Like, think about this. Traditional carving techniques bring that soulful, rich tone that's been cherished for ages, right? And then when you weave in precision from modern technology, like precise tunings and balanced sound projection, it just elevates the whole experience. What we might see is a new breed of mandolins that respect the past but aren't tied down by it. Luthiers using both old-world artistry and cutting-edge tools could start setting new standards in musical quality. This combination could attract players who are looking for instruments with character and consistency, bridging, like, that gap between classic sound and modern playability. So yeah, definitely not too big of a dream. I'd say it's right on track.
Oh, Joe, you're spot on about this hybrid approach. Here's a cool nugget for you. Traditional mandolin crafting involved hand-selecting woods like spruce and maple for their resonance qualities. Each piece had to age like fine wine, right? They'd then carve these by hand, which let them keep all that rich, natural tone. Now, flash forward to today's tech. Modern luthiers are using things like CNC machines for precision cuts, ensuring absolute symmetry, which is crucial for sound balance. But here's the kicker. They're not ditching old-school methods entirely. Some are combining these precise tools with the classic hand-finishing techniques to keep the mandolin's soul alive. So they're kind of marrying the best of both worlds. This approach doesn't just respect tradition, it pushes its boundaries by ensuring every mandolin isn't just a treat to look at, but a beast performance-wise. Any musician worth their salt would tell you an instrument's heart comes from how it's made, and boy, are these new mandolins heartful. How about that blend, huh? What old meets new story could we dig up next?
Whoa, Simon, that blend is almost like a mandolin version of a superhero team-up. Classic skills and modern tech joining forces. This could be the renaissance of string instruments as we know it. What other string marvels might be getting a similar tech-savvy facelift?
Joe, that's a really cool point about the renaissance of string instruments. Now, I'm wondering, have you ever thought about what's happening with violins? Those classic beauties have been around forever, crafted with such precision, even before modern tech was a thing. So, are violin makers also jumping into this mix of new tech with old techniques to create something, super extraordinary? What's the scoop there, Joe?
Yeah, Simon, violins are definitely seeing their share of innovation. But sticking with mandolins for a sec, considering how intricate both these instruments are, it's fascinating to see how traditional crafting methods have, upheld over centuries and now are merging with like the laser precision of modern tech. With mandolins especially, this blend allows luthiers to push limits on durability, playability, and even aesthetic details without losing the instrument's signature sound. It's like they're ensuring every pluck resonates not just with notes, but heritage and future possibilities alike. So mixing old and new isn't just happening. It's setting new standards in how we appreciate and also innovate within music traditions. Just imagine where this could take us next in the world of stringed instruments. What a time to be alive and plucking, right?
Definitely, Joe. The evolution is stellar, but let's poke that a bit, yeah? While we're jazzed about these high-tech advancements, I'm like a tad skeptical. Here's the scoop. If we lean too hard into modern tech, isn't there a risk of losing that handcrafted charm, what some might call the soul of the instrument? Sure, technology brings precision and consistency, which is fabulous for quality control. But imagine a fully machine-made mandolin. Could it really match the vibe of one that's been hand-carved by an expert luthier who's all in their feels about wood grain and resonance? So, I get the perks here, but there's also the part where every note tells a story, not just of the music genre, but of the maker's hands at work. Don't we risk turning unique instruments into, like, cookie-cutter outputs if we're not careful? What are your thoughts on keeping the balance here? Buddy?
Simon, You're hitting a real, soft spot there. The whole idea of each instrument telling its own unique story, that's kind of magical, isn't it? And it feels a bit sad to think we could lose that personal touch, the soul, like you said. I'm all in for using tech to enhance what we can achieve, right? Better precision, consistency, all that jazz. But the thought of a world where every mandolin just pops out of a machine feeling sort of sterile, that makes me a bit uneasy. So yeah, the balance, it's crucial. Like maybe we use the machines to do the heavy lifting, but keep those key steps hands-on. Ensure that each piece still has that human fingerprint. That might help keep the charm intact while still embracing the new tech benefits. What do you think? Are we looking at a partnership with tradition and technology rather than one overshadowing the other?
Oh, totally, Joe. Imagine a signature series where each mandolin has a tech-assisted design, but with final touches by famous luthiers, kind of like having your cake and eating it too. Keeps the soul while ensuring each strum is top-notch. Could that be our sweet spot in preserving tradition with a modern twist?
Oh, Simon, that idea is just brilliant. A signature series where each instrument gets a bit of that modern tech while still having the master's touch. Man, that sounds like the perfect harmony between past and future techniques. It could really cater to both types of audiences, the purists and the innovators. Think about it. Every mandolin would still feel personal, unique, but with a level of perfection that only modern tools can achieve. Listeners out there who appreciate the craft will go wild for this. They get to experience that blend of heritage and precision firsthand. How wild is that combo, huh?
Absolutely wild, Joe. It's like each mandolin from this series would tell its own story, a mixtape of the old school vibes with a splash of new school tech. Listeners would definitely dig diving deeper into each artist's methodology and the innovations sparking up in those workshops. So what surprising secrets do you think we'll uncover next in the world of mandolin mysteries, huh?
Simon, diving into those mandolin mysteries sure has us spinning with stories. Speaking of stories, how about we strum up some laughter with another string favorite, the banjo. You know, they say every mistake in banjo playing is just a new type of twang. Let's riff on those hilarious onstage mishaps and learning curve laughs from both seasoned and novice bluegrass artists. What do you think? Ready to pick up some banter on banjos?
Joe, I'm all in for some banjo breakdowns. Banjos, I mean, come on. Those things have personalities bigger than most musicians. But I gotta ask, isn't it true that half the fun of learning to play the banjo is just embracing the chaos? Like those twangs when you miss a note or when your string decides to snap mid-performance, those moments are comedy gold. But look here, imagine a newbie on stage, right? They're sweating bullets trying to nail that fast-paced bluegrass riff, and bam, their fingers fumble, and out comes this wonky note that has everyone chuckling. Instead of freezing up, they go with it, turning the slip into a part of the show. Now that's turning lemons into lemonade, or should I say, strings into strums. What about you, Joe? Any memorable banjo bloopers from your days dabbling in bluegrass?
Oh man, Simon, you just reminded me of this. One time I tried my hand at the banjo during a casual jam session, right? So there I was thinking, how hard can it be? Famous last words, right? So I start plucking away, feeling pretty confident, and then, mid-song, mind you, I completely lose my grip and the pick goes flying right into the audience. Like it could have been a disaster, but thankfully it landed on a table without causing any real chaos. Everyone starts howling with laughter, including me. Turns out banjos do have their own quirky personalities that demand respect. And yeah, embracing that chaos, totally part of the fun. It makes each performance genuinely unique and memorable. That day definitely taught me to roll with the punches, or twangs in this case, and just enjoy the ride. What about our listeners, huh? Got any funny string slips or banjo blunders to share?
Joe, that pick flying fiasco is just like classic banjo antics, isn't it? Makes me wonder how many other hidden talents these instruments have. Aside from playing music, they're pretty good at launching a comedy career too, huh? So listeners, what about you guys? Ever had those oh no moments that turned into ha-has with your banjos or any other string instrument? Come on, share the twangs and tumbles. I bet some of you have stories that could, give Joe's flying pick a run for its money.
Simon, your talk of oh no's turning into ha-has totally reminds me of this one bluegrass festival I hit up a few years back. So there was this seasoned banjo player, right? Absolutely tearing it up on stage. The crowd was just eating it up. Midway through his set, he goes for this big dramatic finale, really getting into it. And then bam, his G string just snaps. But man, without missing a beat, he yells out, "Well, that's G1." The crowd burst into laughter. It was, perfect. He managed to turn what could have been a showstopper into one of the most memorable moments of the night. It's like these unexpected hiccups really do add a layer of charm and realness to performances, don't they? Keeps everyone on their toes, players and audience alike. What about that for rolling with the punches, huh?
Totally, Joe. That G1 line is classic. Killer way to keep the show rolling. But it really makes me think, does this kind of spontaneity add more flavor to live shows? I mean, sure, a perfectly polished performance is great and all, but isn't there something super authentic about those slip-ups? I'm thinking, maybe those oops moments are actually what folks remember most because they're just so human. It's not just skill, it's style, humor, and real quick thinking on your feet. Makes the artist kinda relatable, don't you think? What if we actually started to hype up these mishaps? Imagine a banjo battle where the funniest slip-up wins. Could flip the script on what a blunder really means in bluegrass, huh?
Oh, Simon, you're spot on. Embracing those slip-ups does add a layer of authenticity and relatability to performances. It's those imperfections are where the magic happens, right? Making them part of the show not only highlights an artist's adaptability, but also their personality. I love your idea of celebrating these mishaps. A banjo battle focusing on recovery from blunders could really showcase creativity in a new light. Think about it. It turns every flub into potential for laughter and connection with the audience. So guys, what do you think? Should we start giving out awards for the best save? Let's hear about those memorable oops moments that turned magical.
Oh, man, from banjo blunders to fiddle fronts. Joe, have you noticed how the fiddle isn't just background music anymore? It's stepping up, front and center, taking the lead in so many bands across genres. Suddenly it's not just about keeping rhythm, it's telling the whole dang story.
Absolutely, Simon. The fiddle's evolution from a mere background player to the star of the show. It's kind of like watching an underdog rise up, right? I mean, it's such a versatile instrument, capable of expressing a wide range of emotions, from melancholy to pure joy. And think about this. Its lead role totally changes how bands structure their songs and performances. It's not just there to fill in. It drives the narrative, adds layers of complexity that pull listeners deeper into the music. So yeah, seeing these fiddlers step into the spotlight, shaping entire performances, that's not just impressive, it's revolutionary in a way. It shifts our perception of what a fiddle can do and challenges other musicians to step up their game too. What's your take on this shift in roles within bands?
Totally, Joe. Seeing the fiddle jump from background gigs to leading the charge, it's wild. Back in the day, who would have thought a fiddle could hold down the fort, right? It's shifted from being just another string in the orchestra to someone telling the main tale. It kind of makes you wonder, doesn't it? What does that do for the other band members? Are they finding new ways to blend their sounds more creatively now that the fiddle's calling the shots? How are these changes shaking up the classic ensemble setup? What do you think, Joe? Have we started a whole new musical revolution here or what?
Man, Simon, you're hitting the nail on the head. This isn't just a shift, it's a complete overhaul of traditional band dynamics. The fiddle stepping out front, it's forcing every member to rethink their role and how they jam together. It's when you change the leader in a pack, every role adjusts, right? The drums, the guitar, they all have to find new ways to support that lead fiddle while still keeping their edge. It absolutely fosters creativity, making everyone step up their game. So yeah, dude, I'd say we're witnessing a musical revolution. Every change pushes boundaries, inspiring not just musicians, but the entire music scene to evolve. What a time to be alive and experiencing this, huh?
Yeah, Joe, revolution for sure. But, think about it. Does this shift ever get risky for a band? I mean, when you rock the boat this much, putting all the spotlight on the fiddle, doesn't that mess with harmony, maybe even outshine other talents? Like traditional roles exist for a reason, right? Everyone knows their place, blends smoothly. But now we're mixing it up, making the fiddle lead. I'm just spitballing here, but could this throw some artists off? Not everyone might like that change or adapt as quickly, which might stir up more than creativity, maybe a bit of tension too. What's your angle on handling these dynamics, Joe? Can every band manage this without skipping a beat?
Hey everyone. If you're just tuning in, Simon and I have been diving into how the fiddle is reshaping roles within music bands. No longer just in the background, the fiddle's stepping up as the main storyteller in many ensembles. We've been chatting about how this shift, this kind of musical revolution, is sparking tons of creativity, pushing other band members to rethink and redefine their roles. It's like a new synergy that demands everyone steps up their game. But yeah, there's also this angle that it might not be all smooth sailing, right? When you mess with traditional setups, it can stir up tension, challenge harmony, maybe even cause some friction among band members who are slow to adapt. So listeners, our topic today, fiddles at the forefront. It's crucial to consider both the exciting opportunities and the potential challenges these changes bring to the world of music.
Oh, totally, Joe. Kind of makes you think, doesn't it? Maybe the fiddle isn't just changing tunes, it's rewriting the whole band playbook. What happens when every instrument wants a turn to lead? Could be chaos or could be genius.
Simon, that thought about every instrument wanting a turn at leadership, it's like sparking this memory of mine. So back in college, I was part of this small folk band, right? We usually had the guitar leading most of our songs, pretty standard stuff. But then one night we're at this little gig and our fiddler suggests we shake things up. He wants to lead on a couple of tracks, which was like not his usual spot. You could feel the tension. It was a mix of excitement and nerves because no one wanted to step on toes, but we also didn't want to stifle his creativity. So we roll with it, right? And man, the audience loved the change. It added this fresh vibe, totally energized our set. But here's the kicker. It encouraged us all to try switching roles now and then. Some nights, I'd take a step back on the bass and let the drummer drive with some rhythmical beats. And what do you know? It was like chaotic at times, sure, but mostly it turned out to be genius, just as you said. Each gig became this experiment, exploring new sounds, pushing boundaries. So yeah, adapting wasn't just possible. It brought out sides of us we hadn't even seen before.
Man, Joe, that's the spirit. Embracing change and giving everyone their spotlight moment. It's like we're finding out just how much those resonating strings can shake things up and maybe even redefine a whole genre. Makes you wonder who might step into the spotlight next, huh? Keep jamming, listeners, and keep those stories coming about how changing the lead role rocks your boat or tunes your band. What new sound will come to the forefront next?
Oh, speaking of instruments stepping into the spotlight, Simon, it's not just the fiddle that's shaking things up. What about the harmonica, huh? That little instrument has carried a huge weight in defining the soul of genres like folk and blues. You think about how it's been used by legends like Bob Dylan and Little Walter. It's elevating simple tunes to emotionally charged anthems. How do you reckon the harmonica manages to pull so much heart into its sound, Simon?
Well, Joe, the harmonica's got this raw simplicity, right? But, sometimes I wonder if its magic is kinda oversold. Hear me out. It's definitely iconic with guys like Dylan and Little Walter blowing life into it. But does it pull more heart than, say, a soulful guitar riff or a powerful vocal? I mean, maybe it's just one piece of a larger puzzle. Sure, it adds a distinct flavor, kind of gritty, pretty earthy, and yeah, it's small but packs a punch. Yet, isn't it really about how it meshes with other sounds that stirs up all those emotions? Could be, we're giving it too much solo credit when it's really about the ensemble, don't you think?
Simon, you've got a point there. I mean, yeah, there's definitely something to be said about the harmonica. It's raw, it's real, and it brings this unique texture to music, right? But is it the sole carrier of soul? Maybe not. It's kind of like when we think about a meal, sure, salt is crucial, but it ain't the whole dish. I get where you're coming from, and honestly, it does sort of challenge my perspective. We often glorify one element because it stands out so distinctly, like the harmonica's wail in a blues track. But maybe we do overlook how it's actually the blend, the harmony of all instruments that creates that powerful impact. So yeah, it makes sense to view it as part of a greater symphony happening within a song, not just the solo hero we sometimes make it out to be. Makes you appreciate the whole setup more, don't you think?
Yeah, Joe, you're spot on. Not just the solo hero vibes, it's like the whole band working in sync makes the tune what it is. It's kind of making me wonder, when was the last time we, really paid attention to how all these elements complement each other instead of just zoning in on one? It's pretty eye-opening to think about music as this big collaborative feast where even the smallest harmonica lick plays a crucial part, but isn't the whole shebang. Man, does thinking about it this way change how you listen to songs now?
Oh, absolutely, Simon. Diving into the specifics and appreciating every element in a song, it kind of transforms your whole listening experience. When you start to understand the background and see how each piece fits, it's a game changer. Let's take the harmonica's role in folk and blues as an example. Historically, this little instrument was brought over by German immigrants in the 19th century. It was cheap, portable, and darn easy to learn on the fly, making it perfect for the traveling musicians of that time. Then you've got figures like Little Walter, who revolutionized the way harmonica was played, amplifying it, experimenting with distortion, essentially turning it from a background rhythm accompaniment to a potent lead voice in blues bands. And Bob Dylan, he infuses it with a raw, expressive sound that taps deep into the soul of folk, speaking to social issues and personal struggles. This complexity, how the harmonica can weave its way around guitar lines or underscore a powerful lyrical passage, it really enriches the musical narrative. Knowing these nuances sort of prompts you to listen more deeply, doesn't it? It's not just hearing the music, it's almost like being part of the conversation happening between the instruments and their histories.
Oh, totally, Joe. It's like we're sonic detectives, right? Peeling back layer by layer of each track, discovering clues from its past to understand its present. Makes you wonder what other stories are hiding in the tunes we jam out to every day.
Oh, definitely, Simon. Aside from the names we've discussed, the harmonica has been a staple in other significant cultural pockets too. Take, for example, its role in the work songs and field hollers of African American slaves. The harmonica's affordability and portability made it ideal for these workers. It wasn't just a musical instrument, but a vehicle for expression within oppressive environments, offering both an emotional outlet and a subtle form of resistance. Moreover, when talking about the amplification of the harmonica, we can't overlook the influence of jazz and how players like Big Walter Horton utilized chromatic harmonicas to bring a whole new layer of sophistication and versatility to blues music. This directly influenced rock musicians later on, bridging genres and expanding the harmonica's presence across various musical landscapes. And speaking of modern times, the harmonica hasn't faded into the background. In indie and alternative circles, artists continue to tap into its soulful sound to add vintage vibes or an earthy authenticity to their tracks, showcasing its enduring appeal. So, you see how the harmonica isn't just another tool for melody. It's woven deep into the fabric of musical history, adapting over time but always retaining that raw emotional power. This layered history adds dimensions to every tune it touches.
Man, Joe, isn't it wild to think how such a small thing as the harmonica holds an entire world of stories? It's like each note played is a whisper from the past, still loud enough to echo into today's music scene.
Yeah, Simon, it is wild. Like when you really think about the harmonica, its impact seems, well, disproportionate to its size, right? But here's a twist. While it's true that each note holds a depth of history, I sometimes wonder if we maybe romanticize it a bit too much. Like, sure, the harmonica has been a voice for many underrepresented communities and pivotal movements, which is beyond cool. But then again, is it the instrument itself, or is it more about the people who play it, their stories, and the context they're played in? So, when we hear those notes, are we hearing just the harmonica, or are we actually tuning into the struggles, the triumphs, and the personal histories of the musicians themselves? Kind of makes you think, huh? It's not just about the sound, it's about understanding the context that gives it soul.
Yeah, Joe, mind blown. It's like the harmonica isn't just playing music, it's telling tales. Are we jamming to a tune, or are we actually time traveling through history with every breath blown into it? Wild, huh?
Yeah, totally wild, Simon. That reminds me of this thing that happened a few years back. So there I was at this small, kind of dusty music festival, right? The stage was all set up in this old barn, straw on the floor, fairy lights all over, super rustic vibe. Anyway, the headliner was this blues band with an elderly harmonica player. I mean, this guy must have been in his 70s. He comes up on stage, this little worn-out guy, handling this equally worn-out harmonica, right? And I'm thinking, what's this going to be like? Because everything about both him and his instrument seemed well past their prime. But man, when he started playing, it was like time stopped. Every note was rich with emotion, pulling everyone into his story without him speaking a single word. It wasn't just blues. It felt like he was bringing the whole history of the instrument to life right before us. Trials, tribulations, joy, sadness, all flowing out in his melodies. Now, reflecting on what you said about time traveling through history with each breath, that moment truly felt like it, Simon. It's like his harmonica wasn't just making music, it was breathing out pieces of the past, tangible and alive. You couldn't help but feel connected, not just to the performance, but to a much larger silent narrative that echoes through every bend and blow. It makes you appreciate not only the music itself, but the profound journey embedded within those sounds. Huh?
Man, Joe, isn't it something? Makes you wonder how many other stories are just waiting to be heard in the simplest moments at places you'd least expect. What unnoticed histories are we walking past every day, right?
Oh, absolutely, Simon. You know, this talk about the historical and emotional depth of the harmonica makes me think about those unforgettable melodies that it's given us over the years. I mean, there are some harmonica solos out there that have not just contributed to their respective songs, but have actually defined whole eras in music history. Take, for instance, the iconic solos delivered by guys like Little Walter, or even something more modern from the likes of Stevie Wonder. These moments aren't just pieces of music. They're milestones that influenced countless musicians and fans alike. How about we dive into some of these legendary harmonica performances and break down what makes them so memorable? We could even listen to a few snippets and share our reactions right here, live. What do you think?
Diving into those classic solos sounds cool and all, but do you think maybe we sometimes overhype these iconic moments just because they're familiar? I mean, sure, Little Walter and Stevie Wonder, they laid down some killer tracks. But what about the unsung harmonica heroes who maybe didn't hit mainstream but still brought something fiery to the table? Like, let's not just stick to the biggest names. Why don't we shake things up a bit? Maybe explore some underrated solos that are not on every top 10 list, but deserve a shout out for their creativity and impact. That could give us a fresh twist, don't you think? It's easy to talk about the greats, but uncovering hidden gems might actually teach us something new about music history and technique.
Oh man, Simon, you're hitting the nail on the head there. It's like in mixed martial arts, right? Everyone talks about the champions, the big names who make headlines, but then you have these incredible fighters grinding it out day after day in smaller gyms, bringing some serious skills to the table that most folks never even hear about. It's the same with music. Digging into those lesser-known, gritty tracks where a harmonica player might be laying down some insane solos away from the mainstream spotlight, that's where you find the raw talent that isn't polished for the masses, but is authentic and powerful. Yeah, let's do that, man. Let's hunt down those under-the-radar harmonica solos that are just waiting to be appreciated in their full glory. it might change our whole perspective on what makes a solo truly great.
Oh, totally, Joe. It's like we're musical archaeologists, huh? Digging up hidden treasures buried under the big hits. Can't wait to see what wild, mind-blowing solos we're going to uncover. Let's get to it.
Yeah, Simon, it's like this one time I was at this cozy little dive bar downtown, kind of a hidden gem, and there was this local band playing. Nobody famous, just a bunch of guys loving their craft. And here's the kicker. Their harmonica player was absolutely mind-blowing. So he starts off with some standard blues licks, and we're all nodding along, right? But then out of nowhere, he dives into this solo that was just, man, it was transcendent. He wasn't just playing the harmonica. He was having a full-on conversation with it. Every note told a story, capturing like a raw emotion that you didn't even realize music could express. It made me think of our talk about uncovering those not-so-well-known solos. Here was a guy who could easily stand toe-to-toe with any of the greats from the past decades, yet only a handful of people in that little bar heard him play. It's crazy to think how many incredible tales are being played out in unassuming spots all over the world. Makes every discovery we dig up feel even more special, doesn't it?
Oh man, Joe, that's just wild. Like, think about it. Here's this guy giving a performance of a lifetime in some random bar, and most of us will never hear about it. It's like a tree falling in the forest with nobody around, you know? And isn't that the real beauty of music? You've got these incredible moments happening off the radar all the time. And it kind of makes me think about those big iconic solos we've heard over the decades. How many of them started just like that, in a small place, blowing everyone away before catching the right ears? So yeah, each little dive bar performance or roadside jam session, they could be holding the next big musical revolution on pause, waiting for the world to catch up. Digging up these stories doesn't just change our view on what's great, but also reminds us of the power of raw, honest music, no matter where it's played.
Yeah, Simon, that's a solid point. But let's think about this. While those dive bar moments are pure gold, right? They kind of challenge the idea of what truly makes music iconic. I mean, if we only count songs or solos that made it big, aren't we kind of limiting ourselves? Here's the twist, though. Those well-known harmonica solos we jam to from the likes of Bob Dylan or Neil Young, they didn't just appear in front of huge crowds. They had their beginnings, maybe somewhere small, a bit gritty, where mistakes were okay and risks could be taken. And these big-name artists, they were once unknowns, throwing their soul into every note without knowing if anyone outside would ever give a tune. So, as much as uncovering hidden gems is thrilling, revisiting those classic tracks with the knowledge that they too started from humble beginnings can be eye-opening. It shows us the full journey of a piece of music, from anonymous brilliance in a dingy club to global stages. Makes you appreciate those iconic moments even more, doesn't it? Like they're not just polished pieces, they're hardened by real-life scrapes and passion.
Yeah, Joe, it's like finding an old coin in a dusty jar. Every scuff and scratch tells a story. Makes you realize it's not the spotlight that makes these tunes iconic, but their journey. How cool is that?
Yeah, Simon, totally cool. It's like every scuff on that old coin isn't just damage, right? It's proof of its journey, marking every bump and scrape along the way. It makes me wonder, though, are we maybe too hung up on finding these perfect, pristine moments in music when it's really the rough edges that tell the richer story? So I gotta ask, what's one musical moment or a solo that you think doesn't get enough love because it's not polished to an industry shine but has those raw, genuine vibes?
Man, Joe, it's like there's magic in the messiness, right? One underappreciated gem that springs to mind is Paul Butterfield's work. Not slick, but dripping with soul. I think we often forget the beauty in the rugged edges because they're overshadowed by those big, shiny moments. Makes you wonder what other raw solos are out there waiting to be rediscovered, huh?
Oh, absolutely, Simon. Speaking of raw solos waiting to be rediscovered, it sort of flips the coin to think about those moments when things go hilariously wrong. Even top performers have those days when the harmonica just decides to tell its own joke. Like there's this famous live recording, I wish I could remember the band, where the lead is ramping up for this soulful, deep harmonica entry, right? And when his big moment comes, boom, he blows, and out comes this wheezy, squeaky sound, totally off key. It was meant to be this profound musical punctuation, but ended up being a comedic pause that had the audience cracking up. Makes me wonder about other such slip-ups. Have you ever run into any funny harmonica mishaps at shows, or heard any gigs go sideways like that?
Oh, Joe, that's hilarious. Yeah, I've totally seen stuff like that. Like there was this one time, no joke, at a street performance. This guy was all set up, right? Crowds gathered around, expecting to hear some mind-blowing harmonica magic. He starts off strong, but then mid-solo, his mustache gets caught in the harmonica. Man, you should have seen him trying to untangle himself while keeping the tune going. Everyone was trying not to laugh, but it was just too much. Ended up being more of a comedy show than a concert. But honestly, sometimes those mishaps make the performances even more memorable, don't you think?
Oh man, Simon, that's golden. Like his mustache, that's some real commitment to the performance, trying to keep going while tangled up. It sure shows that sometimes the best moments are the unplanned ones, huh? I bet that turned into one of those stories everyone kept talking about long after the show. But yeah, totally makes me think like, how often do things go sideways like that? It kind of turns a regular performance into something way more human and relatable. Got any more good ones like that? Or have you ever had a mishap yourself while trying out a new tune or instrument on stage?
Yeah, Joe, I've got to say, things going sideways is more like the norm than we might think. This one time I was at a small gig, right? The harmonica player was all pumped to show off this killer new solo he'd been bragging about for weeks. He steps up, crowd's quiet, you can practically hear the anticipation, and then, first note he hits isn't just flat, it's non-existent. Turns out, he forgot to remove the cap from his instrument, stands there blowing with no sound coming out. The look on his face, man, priceless. Just goes to show, even when you think you've got all your ducks in a row, music has its own ideas. Ain't that kind of beautiful in its own wacky way, though? Makes everything feel less, like, staged and more spontaneous.
Uh, yeah, Simon, that's just brilliant. Total silence when you're expecting a big bang. Reminds me of this one time, right? I was at this open mic night, super casual vibe. There's this dude, pretty cocky, kept talking a big game about how he's gonna like revolutionize the harmonica. So he steps up and everyone's kind of intrigued because he'd been hyping it up all evening. He pulls out his harmonica, gives us this dramatic look and goes for it. But instead of music, all we hear is this high-pitched squeal. Turns out he had grabbed his daughter's toy harmonica by mistake. It even had those tiny bright stickers all over it. The crowd loses it. I mean, they're laughing so hard, some folks are crying. And him? First he's red as a beet, then ends up laughing along, realizing sometimes you just gotta roll with the punches. Man, it wasn't just funny, but kinda humbling, right? Shows you, no matter how much you prep, there's always room for a curveball, or in his case, the wrong harmonica.
Oh, totally, Joe. Imagine that guy's mix-up turning into a viral moment because someone recorded it. Sometimes your biggest blunders can turn into your most beloved highlights. Kinda makes you not want to take things too seriously, huh?
Yeah, Simon, it's wild, right? But think about it. While those goof-ups are hilarious and all, they kind of peel back the curtain on the human side of performing. It's not just about the mistakes, it's about how you handle them. Like there's this pressure to be perfect in music or any performance art, really. But moments like that, they show that messing up is just part of the game. It kind of makes me wonder, though, are we laughing with them because it's genuinely funny or because we're relieved to see even the pros can screw up? Maybe it's a bit of both, huh? What do you think? Does having those flubs out there change the way we view perfection in music?
Uh, yeah, Joe, you hit it on the nose there. It's like, we're all human, right? And seeing someone up there mess up, it's not just funny, it's kind of comforting. Makes me feel a bit better about my own slip-ups. It's like everyone's aiming for perfection, but these flubs, they show us that imperfection is part of the deal. And laughing together at those moments, man, it's like a shared sigh of relief. We're all in this messy, unpredictable concert of life together, aren't we? So, talking about changing views, absolutely, dude. It makes the music more approachable, less aloof, and distant. Kind of breaks down that invisible wall between the performer and the audience. Makes everything more inclusive, don't you think?
Uh, yeah, Simon, you're totally spot on. It's kind of like when you're at a big concert, right? All polished and almost too perfect. And then something goes off, the mic squeals or the lights flicker, and suddenly there's this real raw moment that everyone in that crowd shares. It kind of, I don't know, democratizes the whole experience, makes it more personal somehow. And it's fascinating how these slip ups tend to linger in our memories, often more than the flawless parts. Uh, do you think this could encourage more artists to embrace their imperfections openly, knowing it could actually draw their audience closer rather than pushing them away? What's your take on where we could see live performances evolving with this kind of mindset shift?
Oh man, Joe, you're right. Embracing the imperfections could totally change the live performance scene. It brings everyone down to earth, reminding us we're all just figuring things out as we go. And maybe, just maybe, it encourages a bit more authenticity, a less rehearsed life, more living in the moment, huh? Speaking of moments, it looks like we've got to wrap this one up. Huge thanks to everyone who tuned in today. Uh, Make sure you come back tomorrow at 5 p.m. Eastern for more laughs and deep dives with us here on Infinite Podcast. Can't wait to see what we'll get into next. Probably more glorious goof ups and unexpected wisdom, right, Joe? All right, catch y'all later.